Good afternoon. Today is Saturday, March 9th, 2024. And I thought I would share with you some of the things that are on my mind. There's a lot going on in the world today, a lot to think about, a lot to talk about, and a lot to analyze. But here are a few of my thoughts that are on my mind today. There's a lot of talk about a peace plan in Ukraine. China right now is pushing mighty strongly for peace talks, but insists that Russia will have to be involved. Here are Russia's three conditions since the start of the special military operation on February 24th, 2022. We're into the third year. Number one, Putin has insisted all along on the demilitarization of Ukraine. What does that mean? It not only means that the Ukrainian army will be neutralized, it also means that all of the NATO troops, and they are there, American, Canadian, French, Polish, they're all in there, including mercenaries, will be removed and neutralized. Putin's second major objective, denazification. Now, what does that imply? This Nazi ideology has been growing in Ukraine since the end of World War II. And the glorification of Stepan Bandera and others who fought with the Nazis. He's a national hero today in Ukraine. This Nazi ideology has been growing in Western Ukraine for all of these 79 years. It's an ideology of hatred. It's an ideology of elimination of other peoples. This has been ingrained in the Ukrainian culture, education, and social environments. At the same time, a vast population of ethnic Russians live in eastern Ukraine and have not bought into this ideology. As one could imagine, Russia lost 27 million people in World War II fighting the Nazi onslaught. It was the Soviet Union that defeated Germany's Nazi ideology, Germans' army. Now, what does denazification also imply? Well, it implies getting rid of the government. It implies rewriting the Constitution, for one. But this is not just a military objective, it's a political challenge that is going to involve education. It's going to involve Russia doing all that it can to reverse this tide of Nazi ideology that's been sweeping through not only Ukraine, but many other parts of Europe and the United States. Russia will not be able to do that, but it will be able to eliminate over time the threat of the Nazi ideology on Russia. Putin's third goal, to ensure the neutrality of Ukraine. Now, what that means is, in Russia's eyes, Ukraine can never be part of NATO and possibly never becoming part of Europe, the European Union. Things would have to change drastically in Europe because of the Russophobia and anti-Russian sentiment that is rampant through the governments anyway. I'm not sure that it's the same thing with the people of Europe who feel this hatred towards Russia and the threat that Russia supposedly represents. So any peace deal is going to have to take into consideration these three goals that Russia has clearly stated repeatedly since the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine. Russia has made it clear it will never return Crimea to Ukraine, nor will it return the regions that recently had referendums to return to Russia in the eastern part of Ukraine. Now, the next thing that's on my mind, and I think it's really big news, the announcement a couple of days ago that Victoria Nuland, was stepping down, resigning, or was she nudged out? This is really big news. And I think it's big news all over Russia, for sure, all over many parts of the United States and the European Union. People who know and aware will remember that Victoria Nuland, with Joseph Biden, were the architects of the coup d'etat in 2014 in Kiev known as Maidan. You remember her handing out cookies. You will remember John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and others on the stage with avowed Nazis, encouraging the violence that was taking place on the Maidan in Kiev in 2013, 2014. Victoria Nuland has been, in my mind, one of the most hate-filled, angry, evil people that we have seen in a very long time. She's been in government for 30 years. She's a neocon. She's not the only ones, together with many others. She has infiltrated and pretty much taken control of United States foreign policy for many, many years. Now, if she resigned, the question in my mind is, well, why did she resign? Did she resign because she could read the handwriting on the wall that the Republicans in Congress are refusing to send more billions of dollars to Ukraine? Did she realize Joseph Biden saying the Europeans need to do more, NATO needs to do more, and all of those countries are bankrupt and their weapons arsenals are pretty much depleted? It's been well reported now for months that NATO is going to take years before they replenish their military stockpiles. Was it clear to Victoria Nuland that Ukraine was no longer a number one priority for the United States? Biden has made it clear, Anthony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, and others, that they're going to redirect their energies and their focus and their foreign policy towards America's main enemy, China. Obama was the first to pivot to Asia. Now Biden and his administration is pivoting away from Eastern Europe and Ukraine to the Pacific and China. So, did Victoria Nuland see that and see it coming? That she was now a persona non grata, not an asset, but a liability? Or that high ups in the administration now see her as a liability and nudged her out? To me, it doesn't matter. She's gone. And the fact of the matter is, it seems that the United States is indeed pivoting away from Ukraine towards China. Something else that's really huge, I think. Zelinsky recently fired his top general, Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny happens to be more popular than Zelinsky in Ukraine. Several polls have proven that. Zelinsky also ordered the reshuffling of the top military command. What he's basically doing is blaming the failure of the counteroffensive and this war against Russia on other people, deflecting the blame from himself, who has refused to allow troops to withdraw from Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and other locations so that they all were massacred. And in the recent case of Avdiivka, many of them fled, but many more surrendered. In the news yesterday and today, Zelinsky is planning to fire. This is how he does it. It gets leaked out into the public in the Ukrainian media. He's planning to fire his foreign minister, formerly a very close ally, Dmitry Kuleba. One has to ask, what is going on in Ukraine? With money not forthcoming from the United States of America, less coming from Europe, Zelinsky is striking out now against those who have supported him with money and weapons. Different countries in the EU, the United States, the Republicans for holding up approval of the funding to come to Ukraine. From where I sit, it looks to me that Zelinsky is desperate. He's throwing some of the people closest to him over the past years under the bus. Is Zelinsky next? It appears to me that the United States has had growing dissatisfaction with him for several months now. And by openly declaring they're pivoting away from Ukraine to China, if I was Zelinsky, I would be thinking about my own life. I would be thinking about some kind of an escape to somewhere else, because things are not looking good for Mr. Zelinsky today. And people in Ukraine are suffering and have been suffering tremendously because of this conflict that has destroyed much of their infrastructure, that has destroyed many of their cities and towns and villages, including parts of Ukraine and Odessa that have been struck by Russian missiles. People now realize that Ukraine is not winning and that Zelinsky has been sending them like sheep to the front to be slaughtered. Polls are indicating that the people are no longer happy and supportive. I want to remind everybody, when Zelinsky came to power, he promised to be the peace candidate. He promised that he would restore relations with Russia. No sooner was he elected and sworn in did he change the 180 degrees and went to war, full scale, against Russia. Now, related to this are some other things that have caused me a great deal of concern. President Macron called this emergency meeting last week in Paris, the leaders of NATO and the EU, and he wanted them all to agree that NATO would put boots in the ground before they would let Russia win. Well, Macron got immediate pushback from everybody in his own party, his own people in France. The Chancellor of Germany, Scholz, he come out and openly disagreed with Macron and said, we did not agree with that at all. There was no consensus. Several other NATO countries have said, absolutely not. We will not put troops on the ground. Macron and Scholz are openly fighting with each other. They don't like each other. It's clear. What does this mean? Well, if I was Zelinsky, I would be further worried that support for him and the fight in Ukraine against Russia is not very important anymore to Europeans who have seen their economy devastated because of this war, because of the sanctions they've agreed to with the United States, because of the pipeline, Nord Stream 1 and 2, being blown up, cutting off gas, cheap Russian gas that fuels the Germany and the European economies. The tide is beginning to turn in Europe. Zelinsky can see it. But out of the mouths of Macron, out of the mouths of the German health minister, out of the towns of Ursula von der Leyen, out of the mouths of other elected and non-elected officials in Europe, they are preparing their people for war against Russia. They keep telling their people, we have to be afraid because Russia is going to invade. One by one, Russia will pick off Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Romania, Sweden, Finland, Moldova, Georgia, on and on and on, all the way to the UK. This is what they're doing to gaslight their people, to keep them in fear of a Russia that is not the Soviet Union, of a Russia that has no intentions and has shown no intention to invade any countries. And they're using Ukraine to scare their people into thinking that this is just the first country that Russia will overtake. This is very dangerous. And it's very dangerous because we are seconds away from a nuclear war. In 2016, in 2017, I published a film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, The Final Wake-Up Call. I was worried at that time that nuclear war between the United States and Russia was so close. The United States was pulling out of nuclear treaties with Russia unilaterally. The rhetoric, the hateful, evil, adversarial rhetoric towards Russia was overwhelming. And I feared then that nuclear war was a real existential threat. And that we were, as Dr. Helen Caldicott said in my film, walking like lemmings towards the cliff of nuclear annihilation. The threat today is far greater than that. The United States is the only country of the 7 or 8, however many there are now, nuclear armed states to have a first strike nuclear doctrine. Russia does not have one. China does not have one. Not one of the other nuclear armed countries have a first strike dogma. And that first strike is aimed at Russia. The United States broke a promise in 1991 that it would not expand NATO 1 inch towards Russia. Bill Clinton quickly broke that, and now 13 former Soviet states have joined NATO, and recently Sweden and Finland. They all border Russia. The United States and NATO have been conducting massive war games all along Russia's borders, including in the Arctic, all preparing for a first strike on guess who? Russia. If you can put yourself in Russians' shoes, whether it's Putin, the Kremlin, the Russian military, or the Russian people, for that matter, when you see all of this happening over the last 20 years, you have to think, we are being threatened. We're being threatened with the destruction of our country and our culture. There's no other way to look at that. For any objective person to say that NATO is a defensive organization and that Russia is the aggressor, when we have 75 years of facts and proof that the United States and its vassals have been planning the destruction of Russia, the elimination of the government, the balkanization, breaking up of this massive country and stealing its resources. The Russians know this. Anybody who's willing to study the history has to agree and accept that it's the United States that's the aggressor and not Russia. The United States has been blaming Russia for invading Ukraine illegally without provocation. The case that I have laid out just now, and the case that I've laid out in previous broadcasts and in many articles and publication, clearly prove that it's the United States that's the aggressor. Martin Luther King famously said, "My country," and I'll paraphrase, "is the most destructive force on the planet of the earth, and I cannot support it." Martin Luther King. How is this going to end? I don't know. I've been accused of being a Kremlin asset, a Putinista. I've been accused of being propagandized. I've been accused of being pro-war and killing because I have taken the positions that I have had to try to show the truth of what's been happening, and that it is not Russia. Since Russia, under President Putin in the year 2000, have not been the aggressors. How's it going to end? I don't think it's going to be a peace treaty. I think we're very close to the total and complete capitulation of Zelinsky, Ukraine, the Ukraine military, NATO that's involved in it, and the complete capitulation of NATO, which is now an empty shell, a dog barking without a bite. And it will end with the complete capitulation of all of them. Russia will only accept the unconditional surrender, will not be making any deals, will not be making any compromises when it comes to those three goals I mentioned earlier. What else is in the news? Absolutely related. Since October 7th, Israel, Gaza, the conflict, Israel has slaughtered some 30,000 innocent civilians in Palestine, in Gaza. These two are connected, and they're connected in many ways. The first is America's bloody hands are all over both of them. America has funded, to the tune of over $100 billion, this proxy war, they call it, in Ukraine. America has unleashed its broadsides of its State Department, the CIA, its propaganda against Russia to try to turn the world against Russia. Well, it hasn't worked. And we see the same thing happening now in this conflict, this genocide of Israel on the Palestinians. Whose bloody hands are all over that? The United States of America, sending billions of dollars every year, and now billions more to Israel in weapons to kill Palestinians. The two are connected in another way. The masters of war, who are behind the curtains, who control the media, who control the military-industrial complex in the United States and in Europe. The moneyed people, the globalists, are conducting these conflicts because it's worth a lot of money to them. They've been doing it really for a few hundred years. They did it in World War I, World War II. They've done it in every war, everywhere since, and they're doing it now. My final thought on what's happening in this conflict in Israel: where the hell are the other Arab and Muslim countries? They've not come to the aid of their brothers and sisters. They've played back. Why have they stayed back? They're afraid of what the United States of America will do to them. They've seen what America has done to other countries: invaded, sanctioned, doomed politically. I want to remind this audience, shortly after 9/11, General Wellesley Clark, then retired, was on the show America Today, I think, whatever it was, with I forget who it is. Doesn't matter. What matters is he said in this television interview that he went to the Pentagon to visit some old friends, and he was meeting with a general. And the general said, you know, America is going to invade Iraq. And America indeed did that. And Wesley Clark went back again, and the same general says, and you know, it's even worse. And he showed him a classified document that said, America is going to invade 7 countries in 5 years. My friends, we've seen it happen. Iraq twice, Syria, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, Libya, and the next one in line is Iran. And part of the strategy I believe that's going on in this conflict, this genocide that Israel is conducting against Palestine. Part of the strategy is to suck Iran into this war. Israel's already bombed some kind of an oil depot in Iran. Israel, it's well known, has assassinated nuclear scientists and has disabled parts of Iran's nuclear development facilities, nuclear research facilities. And Iran represents the biggest threat to the United States in the region. And this has been all of these years since the United States disposed of the legal elected government of Iran and placed the Shah in control, all with the attempts to take down Iran and weaken it. They've failed. And this is another one of the goals of the globalist, using the American battering ram, the American aircraft carrier in the Middle East, namely Israel, to get at and take down Iran so that they can completely control all of the oil reserves in the Middle East. Coming up next week, here in Russia, unlike what's happening in the United States in the electoral contest between Joe Biden and the presumptive nominee, Donald Trump, President Putin will be overwhelmingly elected. The elections are the 15th, 16th, and 17th, 3 days in Russia, to allow everybody in different parts of the country to be able to vote. Putin's popularity before the special military operation was in the 60th percentile. Since the start of the special military operation in February 2022, Putin's favorability rating is in the 80th percentile. There are no serious contenders. He will win in a landslide. Now, this has people in the United States and the United States State Department terrified. Russia has warned the United States State Department in Russia, the embassy, several NGOs who are attempting to meddle in this Russian election. It's very clear. You just have to read the statements of the United States of America and its elected officials and unelected officials. Their goal is to remove Putin, destabilize the country, get rid of him, and then take it over. Russia meddling in the 2016 election has been proven to be an embarrassing farce. The Mueller investigation spent how many million, $10 million, whatever it was, trying to prove that Trump got help from the Russians in that election. All of those lies have been exposed. Russia had nothing to do with it. Now I want to go to and compare what's going on in the United States today between Joseph Biden and Donald Trump. Now, I didn't watch the State of the Union. I had watched several clips from alternative media. What was clear, there was an angry old man ranting and raving against everybody and everything, including his own Supreme Court. Embarrassed them publicly, internationally, during his State of the Union address. What we've seen of Joe Biden over the last couple of years is a senile old man, filled with anger. We have seen a man who cannot put two sentences together. On the other side, we have Donald Trump. Donald Trump is hurling arrows, and has been, at Joe Biden for being a crook, which I believe Joe Biden is a crook. He's guilty of treason. He's guilty of bribery in Ukraine. It's all public. It's all over YouTube. It's there for everybody to see. But Trump has been blaming Biden for all of America's ills. Immigration at the border, the terrible failure in Afghanistan and now Iraq, and now Ukraine. It's really sad that the American people once again are faced with a choice between evil. And they will say, well, I'm going to vote for the lesser evil. It's still evil. And it really troubles me that American people cannot see that for decades, maybe centuries, they have not had a voice in who became president of the United States. It's been clear to me in my entire lifetime that the president is not elected, he's selected. And America and the world now are being treated to this three-ring circus they call the election cycle. Europeans are involved in this as well. Their leaders are trying to influence the American election. They're afraid of Trump because he's saying he's not going to have anything to do with NATO. He might even dissolve NATO. Trump is saying he'll end the Ukraine conflict overnight. That's a threat to all of these leaders. They've staked their claim, their reputations, and their power on this war in Ukraine with the United States at the expense of their own people and their own economies and their own safety. So they are coming out in favor of Joe Biden. Now, Russia has officially said to us, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. Nothing changes. Putin has said that repeatedly. Foreign Minister Lavrov has said it repeatedly. The spokesman for the Kremlin, Peskov, has said it. Zaharova for this foreign State Department has said it. The Russians know that it's not the person who holds the office of president who creates foreign policy. They figured that out a long time ago. And what they also figured out, unfortunately, it took a long time, and I think it finally happened when former Chancellor Merkel and the former president of France, Hollande, and Poroshenko, former president of Ukraine, all came out and said the Minsk agreements were just a scam, a ploy, a ruse to gain more time to build up Ukraine's army. When they came out and said that, from that point on, Russia knew. They had been naive, perhaps, but they could no longer believe anything coming from the mouths of the United States and their vassals. I want to finish on this point. You know, I occasionally get emails from friends that said, be safe over there. And the over there is here, where I am in Crimea. They read apparently mainstream media, and they know this war is going on. They know that different parts of Russia and Crimea have been attacked repeatedly in recent days and weeks with multiple drones, most of which have been shot down. They know that the bridge, big news, in Crimea was attacked and hit twice, partially destroyed, all rebuilt now. And what I have to say to all of you who are watching, since I've been coming here to Russia in 2016, again in 2018 and 2019, and since I have been living here for 4 years now, since March of 2020, I have to tell you that Russia is a peaceful, harmonious, safe, and united country. The economy here is growing. There is no scarcity of food or anything anywhere in Russia. Here in Crimea, I went to the market today. Everything was fresh, no GMOs. I went to the supermarket because there's only a few items I can't get in the market. And the supermarket was filled with people. The shelves were filled. All of the shelves were being replenished. There were people working for the supermarket replenishing, restocking the shelves with everything you could imagine. There's nothing lacking. Crimea, in spite of all the attacks, is probably the most well-defended place on the planet. I want everybody to realize this. People in Crimea, in Sevastopol, the Black Sea port of the Russian Navy, I've been there several times in the last few months. Nobody is living in fear. Events are not canceled. They were in the very beginning of the war. They're not anymore. Everything is going on as normal. There are no restrictions to crowds and gatherings whatsoever anywhere in Crimea. And I want to remind people, while we're talking about Crimea, for those who don't know or will not accept historical fact, the context of history, Catherine the Great defeated the Ottoman Empire and took Crimea as part of the Russian Federation. It's been that way since the middle to end of the 18th century, the time of our American Revolution. Crimea has been a part of Russia. The majority of the people here are Russian-speaking, ethnic Russians. In 1954, I think it was, Nikita Khrushchev, Ukrainian, for personal political reasons, deeded it to the management of Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union. Nobody thought any big deal about this, but it was an illegal move that has since been proven. People in Crimea are happy to be back in Russia. I have seen incredible change since I first came here in 2016, when Ukraine had been neglected for all of those years. They took Crimea's money and returned none of it. Development is happening everywhere. It's happening here in Yalta, in Sevastopol, in Simferopol. It's happening in Feodosia. It's happening in Kerch. You see construction cranes everywhere. Many, many people from the Urals and beyond are coming here for work because there's so much work. There's so much growth that's happening. It was reported in the news yesterday and today that Crimea is outpacing all other parts of Russia in growth and development. Why? Well, because Russia has invested billions of rubles in the reconstruction, redevelopment, the building of hospitals, schools, roads, infrastructure has all been invested in heavily. When Putin says Crimea will never return to Ukraine, all I can say is you better believe it. Well, today is Saturday afternoon. It's 5:45, quarter to 6 here in the evening on March 9th, 2024. Thank you for listening. I hope you will share this rant of mine, my views, with friends of yours wherever. Thank you for joining.